Welcome to a comprehensive analysis of Nod-Krai's music. We'll briefly but succinctly analyze the regions of Lempo, Hiisi and Paha Isle in terms of cultural influences and music theory. I'll try to explain everything in a way that's understandable for everyone, but if you have some prior musical knowledge, that's even better. Nod-Krai is mostly inspired by music from Scandinavian regions, but there are many influences from traditional Slavic music too, from using traditional instruments to borrowing different styles and chord progressions from the music. There is one chord progression in particular that can be found in almost every soundtrack, and it pretty much defines the general feel of Nod-Krai's music. Welcome to Nasha town, where our infamous minor 1 to major 4 chord progression makes its first appearance. You can hear the change right here. This progression is quite commonly found in traditional Scandinavian music, but you've probably encountered it before in all kinds of pop and rock music. It is one of the signature chord progressions of the Dorian mode. We start on the minor chord of the first degree of the scale, but then we move to the 4th degree, which is a major. This utilizes the natural 6th degree that gives the Dorian mode its recognizable sound. Variations of this progression can be found all over Nod-Krai. Dorian mode is a type of a minor mode, as evidenced by the fact that our 1 chord is E minor. However, in this specific arrangement, the mode that is expected to be minor and sorrowful actually sounds quite joyful. So why is that? Well, partially it's because of the playful tin flute and the energetic syncopated rhythm that kind of provokes a sense of happiness. And secondly, even though we are in a minor mode, that does not mean that everything is minor. As I've repeated many times before, the first chord is minor, however, the second one is major, and we normally associate major with happiness and joy. This means that we transition from, in Razor language, from a sad sound to a happy sound, which can symbolize hope and a bright future, so it's not something depressing at all. I also really like this version of the minor 1 to major 4 chord progression from one of the night themes of Nasha town. The progression goes as follows. This time we actually aren't in the Dorian mode, as the tonality is different. But this progression that we heard in the previous song is present here too. It might not seem obvious from the notation, but keep in mind that an octave has 80 degrees, so we could rewrite the last 2 chords like that. This is obviously the same chord sequence that appeared in the previous song, first a minor chord and then a major chord, 4 degrees higher. The reason why I really like this song is not just because of the last 2 chords, but because of the first chord as well. As you can see, we start in minor 1, then take a trip to the minor 5 chord, but then come back at the first chord, just that the first chord is now a major, not a minor. It's a really surprising turn from a minor sound to an unexpected glimmer of hope that is brought by the last chord, and it works really well in my opinion. Plus the arrangement, the sustained flutes, strings and voices create a sense of very deep longing with their simple but really moving melody, and I'm honestly just surprised to hear something so emotionally provoking in a random night theme. Of course, Nasha town boasts with high musical diversity as well, as it is a city of travelers. I would like to point out the summer-like theme from the Curatorium of Secrets. The flagship theme is an imitation of Northern European folk dance music. And apparently, one day, Hoyo composers were particularly bored and decided to create this abomination of a time signature. If it even is a time signature, I have no clue. I just align the start of each measure with the tambourine beat, because that's the only way to make sense of it. Being Aino's home, the Kling Klang Kronkaki workshop's music is joyful and peacefully childish. Major harmonies are prevailing, which is a rarity in Nod-Krai. Still, we can hear influences from Northern European countries with the playful fiddle and the whistle, which plays the main melody here. Just that similarly to the flagship theme, we aren't aiming for the Korean Viking feel, but something more akin to a dance song. So generally the music of Lempo Isle can be characterized as Northern Europe based, but with a lighter feel. Not too mystical nor too dramatic. The instruments that we can hear normally have a brighter resonance, like the whistle or the guitar, which can often be heard in the background. The hurdy-gurdy and other classical string instruments that we hear can have a darker sound when played in the bass section, but this bass section is mostly avoided in the Lempo Isle in order not to make the music too dark. I think this soundtrack is a good example of that. A lot of traditional instruments, a somewhat sad sound, but it's still very light and far from the grim and dark Norse song. In this soundtrack you can even hear the bagpipes. I should not forget to mention that the majority of this song uses a minor 1, minor 5, major 4 chord progression, which is again a variation of minor 1 to major 4, just with one additional step in between. Maybe it would be good to give this chord progression a name, since I don't want to repeat myself too much. What about the Nod-Krai? I know I'm really unoriginal. If you have a suggestion, please write it in the comments and I will be more than happy to just stick with it for the rest of my life. On Hiisi Island we can hear the theme that was first featured in the Moonweb event. The Nod-Krai can already be noticed in the first few bars, only that this time we finish at a suspended chord. If you're not familiar with sus or suspended, not suspicious chords, their third degree is suspended one step up or down, meaning that they are neither minor nor major. In our case, this removes the bright major third degree from the chord and replaces it with a more mellow second degree. You can experience the grandness of this second degree right here. It is very powerful, especially with the slight syncopation. Compared to the Lempo Isle, the strings are also much fuller and much deeper, and they produce an ethereal and mysterious sound. We can also hear instruments like the zither, which has this divine timbre, and the hurdy-gurdy, which I've mentioned before. Hurdy-gurdy is a string instrument, however the bowing of the strings is done by rotating a wheel, and the pitch is determined by pressing keys. If you listen closely, you can actually hear the sound of these keys being pressed. And this gives the hurdy-gurdy an even more intimate presence, and I think that this intimate presence actually fits the theme of a tribal soundtrack very well. The singing emphasizes this tribal feel even more. After this, it was really hard for me to choose another soundtrack from the Frostmourne Sands, simply because all of them are insanely beautiful. Pretty much every one of the themes includes the Nod-Krai, some kind of ethereal female singing voices that are often accompanied by a harp or a flute. But even though they might seem similar, each OST has a different melody and some additional quirks, which just shows how much distinct songs can be made using the same harmonies and the same orchestration. So I'd really just recommend it to explore the area with in-game music. Or alternatively, in the pinned comment, I linked a playlist with all of the Nod-Krai soundtracks, and without this playlist I would have been unable to make this video. So thank you Natlan Diluk. I encourage you to try and find the Nod-Krai moment in each soundtrack, because recognizing it becomes pretty easy with some practice. However, I'd still like to introduce you to another variation of the Nod-Krai, which is the anti-Nod-Krai. Basically, instead of going minor 1, major 4, we go the opposite way. We start with major 4 and then move to minor 1. It pretty much sounds like the same chord progression, but the effect it has on you is kind of the opposite. Although your experience of this might be different from mine, but to me the Nod-Krai sounds resolute, like I'm a falling autumn leaf carried by the wind, until I finally land gracefully on the ground and rest there. Meanwhile, the anti-Nod-Krai feels like a frantic gust of wind, shoves me back up into distress for a moment, and my emotions tense again. Okay, but now let's move to another very important piece of music that we hear on the Hiisi Island, and that is Columbina's theme. We see many recurring motifs that I've talked about before. We start with a harp into a Nod-Krai, which is heavy on sus4 chords. The sense of etherealness that is very fitting for a character like Columbina is very much present here. Her breathy voice adds to that, and also the fact that it begins with just her solo singing, accompanied by a single instrument, makes the atmosphere feel extremely angelic but at the same time quite lonely. I think this characterizes Columbina perfectly. We also witness these build-up chords going up and down on the scale. It's a chord progression that can be quite commonly found in Nod-Krai. In fact, you can hear it in many Frostmourne soundtracks, but also in that one Nasha down OST that I talked about before. These chords do not stand out as much, but they actually change the mode from Dorian to Aeolian, which is sadder and less hopeful. They also create this up and down motion, which makes it feel like Columbina is telling a story through her singing. It is also quite interesting that this song shares quite a lot of resemblance to Genshin's main theme. It's like Columbina's song is a minor version of the Genshin theme song, also known as Dream Aria. The focal point of Dream Aria is that it uses the Lydian mode, which is introduced to us with the first two chords. The melody starts with a major fourth, and then continues in a way that utilizes the most characteristic note of its respective mode. In the Lydian mode, that note is the sharp 4, while in the Dorian mode, that is the natural 6th, which I've mentioned before. And by the way, the Lydian mode is literally the minor variation of the Dorian mode. Then, after the first two chords, we go into a 3-chord build-up, starting from the chord that lies in Columbina's theme on the flat 6th degree, and in Dream Aria on the natural 4th degree. So if you still follow me here, you know that in both cases this moves the mode for one direction more to the minor side of the mode spectrum. So it's like the same concept of a song, just that one is set in a minor and the other one in a major scale. Relative to the functional notes of the mode, these are the same chords. For example, if you wanted to play both songs in modes relative to C Ionian, all the chords apart from the tonic would be the same. Try to give it a listen. I don't know if that's just a coincidence, because it's not that wildly unusual for a song to be constructed in that way, but I really wouldn't be too surprised if the connection is actually intended. Aria is after all one of the moons, and the person who taught Columbina her song likely has a connection to the moons as well. Okay, now before this video gets too long, let's talk a bit about the music of Paha Isle too. In areas close to the Fatui facility, the soundtracks are very intense and battle-like. I absolutely love this one. The fierce singing is so powerful and so reminiscent of the Viking battle songs, especially the oil of the percussion and the drone notes that accompany the singing. You can hear what I presume is a nickel harpa, constantly playing the 1st and the 5th degree in the background, while the melody absolutely destroys. One effect that drone notes have is that they create a really big breakthrough feeling once those drone notes change, which causes a lot of contrast in harmony, as you can hear right here. The more things I'd like to point out are: 1. The song is in a minor key, but you can hear the singer do a really short trill using the major 3rd. This creates a really sudden and unexpected bright sound, which is what truly sells the song to me. And this is actually a thing that was common back in the times of the Vikings, and it's surprising to me that back then, with little theoretical musical knowledge, they came up with something that doesn't sound natural, but it's just so good. Then the second thing I want to point out are the parallel fifths, which you can hear right here. For those who have some musical education, you've probably heard that parallel fifths are forbidden in classical music, but they're actually more common in traditional music, and as someone who does not like to be contained by the societal norms, I actually really enjoy the sound of parallel fifths. Similarly to that sudden major, they create a lot of intensity and add an even grimmer tinge to the soundtrack. Absolutely fabulous. Honorable mention also goes to the other OST that plays outside of the facility, which we first heard in the God's Limit teaser. It's absolute peak as well. Outside of the facility, the music is definitely less fierce, but Norse influences persist. In this soundtrack, you're gonna hear a more upbeat triplet rhythm. I kind of naturally associated this rhythm with sailing, but that might be Pirates of the Caribbean bias. Of course, we are still in the Dorian mode, so more traces of the Nod-Krai can be heard for the attentive listeners, although many times the note progression is swapped here with a simple minor chord exchange, which makes the harmony more mild and consequently brings more focus to the rhythm and the atmosphere of the song. In regards to the atmosphere, in Nasha town I talked a lot about how the music is quite light despite being minor, but here in Paha Isle there are many instruments with a very deep and dark resonance. I mentioned the nickel harpa before, which often produces these stable and dark drone notes. And there is also a lot of percussion involved, which really gives the songs a more intense metal-like feel. But the final night cemetery is an exception to that. It is far more sad and innocent than anything you can hear in Nod-Krai. In my opinion, the choir and the organ in the background adds to church music, which is of course very fitting for a cemetery. The melody is very diatonic and simple, no surprises, just focus on the atmosphere it creates. The chord progression also feels very neutral and is based on major and minor 7th chords, which suggests influences from a more modern era. In fact, a minimalist classical piece on the Nature of Daylight by Max Richter seems to have been a major inspiration for this song, but in contrast to him, Hayao actually used this song to create an atmosphere for a cemetery, which is much more fitting than whatever pretentious omelette Richter was cooking. Anyway, this is it for the general overview of Nod-Krai's music. A lot of note progression everywhere, traditional Norse and Northern European instruments, with some traces of Slavic folk music, generally with a more minor and Dorian feel with some exceptions. Nevertheless, each of the islands is distinct in its musical atmosphere and in its utilization of the Dorian mode. But we are not completely done yet. There are a couple of Easter eggs I have in the store. First, I would like to mention the one and only photon of fluctuation leitmotif. It can be heard in one of the battle soundtracks, but it's actually really fun because it's played in the Phrygian mode this time. This means that the second degree of the scale is flat, and you can hear that the second last note of the motif here is half a step lower than it normally is. It's really fun stuff. Next, in the battle OST that plays in the Fatui facility, you can very clearly hear the Fatui leitmotif. Then the Rarers theme reminded me a lot of the Chasm Underground for various reasons that I don't really have time to dive into. But the orchestral arrangement, the classical minor cadences that appear a lot in Chasm Battle OSTs, and also there's this minor 9 sound which heavily emphasizes the dissonance between the 2nd and 7th degree. So all of that combined and more, it just sounds so much like Chasm, and I don't think I'm just biased because I like Chasm OST a lot. I am quite sure there is some connection behind them because both the Chasm Underground and Rerir were corrupted by the Abyss, cursed with immortality, and they have links to the Cataclysm. And lastly, but you might disagree with me on this last one, in Prince's theme we can hear this chromatic descending motif, which is not a super rare thing, but it is definitely peculiar that this motif appears as the main motif in exactly one other Genshin character theme. And that character is our beloved Hu Tao. And again, I think that there was possibly a conscious choice to make the theme so similar because this motif doesn't really appear anywhere else in Genshin apart from these two specific themes as far as I am aware. I think the reason is that they both share a strong connection to the boundary between life and death. So it is Hu Tao's mission to escort dead souls from this boundary into the realm of the dead so that they don't get trapped as ghosts forever. While Flynns literally lives amongst these kinds of ghosts who never manage to fully cross into the realm of the dead and are now trapped in the light realm. So this is it. Doing all the listening and the research and the theorizing and transcribing for this video was really fun. I learned a lot and I truly hope you did too. A final disclaimer is that I'm very prone to make mistakes, so if I meant any in explaining or in anything else, I would be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. Furthermore, I'm attaching some traditional and non-traditional music that I alluded to in the description, so you can have a listen to that if you want to have a more complete knowledge of the subject. Thank you so much to those who stuck till the end, and I'm eternally grateful for the support. Bye!